to everybody. We've got 6 attendees on our call right now. Welcome to everybody. The College Women's Club of Westfield welcomes you to our second in our series of Zoom calls about college in the COVID landscape. And tonight our conversation is about standardized testing in the COVID landscape. And we are very fortunate to have Susanna McLean, who is our moderator for the evening, and two esteemed colleagues from Princeton Review, Rob Franick and Nicole Iannucci, and the three of these very talented individuals are going to take it away from here. And I ask all of you to please complete the little poll that we put there just so we can know who's in our audience, and also urge you to join the College Women's Club, donate to the College Women's Club, become part of our organization if that is within your means and your interest. We welcome everyone. So without further ado, I'm turning it over to Susanna. Thanks, Susanna.
Hi, everyone. These are crazy times, as we all know. So we thought we would cover the issue of standardized testing because there have been so many changes in the last few months. It's always a source of anxiety for a lot of our students, and now it's certainly more so. We are welcoming a couple of terrific experts in the field, where Nicole and Rob Franick will review what the standardized tests are at a very high level, and then go over some of the changes that have happened recently. And finally, I will go over some suggestions to think about whether and when to test. So Nicole, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Susanna. My name is Nicole Iannucci. I am the Director of Outreach for the Princeton Review in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Just wanted to first give you a quick overview of what exactly are the SAT and the ACT. So they are testing that are used in the admissions process. It gives colleges a really broad comparative information for students to determine well, it's not the only factor to determine admission to schools, but it helps colleges make this decision. Certainly, it's just one piece of the college admissions puzzle. Typically, it's taken by high school students. Well, anyone can register. You don't necessarily have to be a high school student, but typically we see students taking it in their junior year at some point during their junior year, although seniors and sophomores also have been known to take it. SAT versus ACT, all colleges will accept either or, so there is no preference in which exam to take besides a student's personal preference. Just as a geographic note, on the East Coast and West Coast, SAT definitely is more popular, whereas in the middle of the country, ACT is more popular. So let's just run through this chart really quick to see what exactly are these tests measuring. Do they measure intelligence? And the answer here would be false. These tests are not meant to measure intelligence. They are not used as IQ tests. There have been very smart people who don't test well or don't show their intelligence on these exams. Can they be used to award aid? That is true. They can be used to award merit scholarships. It's actually quite a big piece of what they are used for, typically in general and typical times for colleges. Do they reflect your GPA in high school? No, they do not. Again, along the same lines as measuring intelligence, just because you have a really great GPA doesn't necessarily translate that you'll have an excellent test score, or vice versa. You could have somebody that maybe their grades are not so stellar, but they do really well on the exam. Can they predict your college GPA? That again is false. College Board once tried to say that it could predict, but there's been no evidence of that at all. Can it be prepared for? That is true. Yes, it can be prepared for, absolutely. Just like any exam or anything that's important in life, you can prepare for it. And should you prepare for it? The answer we say here is definitely yes. These can be high stakes exams, so it is important that you are prepared. And does it test what you've learned in high school? We put the question marks here because yes and no, it's a little tricky. It does test what you've learned in high school in that there are subjects on there such as math, science, English, writing. So yes, in some ways it tests what you learn in high school, but not really, because what we say at the Princeton Review, these tests are really great at measuring, is they're great at measuring how well you can take the SAT or the ACT, not necessarily how well you do in those particular subjects. Okay, so next slide, please. one more. There, okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, so what exactly is on the SAT and the ACT? Let's take a look at the format of these tests. The ACT is exclusively multiple choice, where the SAT is mostly multiple choice, but there is a section on the math area where you do need to grid in your answers for some of these questions. So just be aware of that if you are leaning towards the SAT. The content on these exams, the ACT has 5 sections: English, math, reading, science, and an optional writing section. And for the SAT, there is math, reading, writing and language section, and then an essay that is also optional. So the essay is optional for both of these exams. The ACT scoring is broken down. Each section will have a score in a range between 1 and 36. Those scores are then added together and averaged out to give you your composite score. The SAT, they're broken down into 2 sections, the math and then the reading and language section. So each one of those sections will have its own score between 200 and 800. And then those would be added together to give you your total composite score. So when a student or a friend or college asks you what your test score is, they are asking you what your composite score is. You can see, just so you know, the essay section for both of these tests, it's a completely separate grade. It's not taken into consideration with the composite score. The timing of these exams, you can see they're pretty long exams. Students are not used to taking exams quite this long. You can see the time with and without the essay. So the ACT clocks in just a smidge under the SAT in terms of time. But I always like to point this out too. If you take a look at the number of questions that these exams have, so the ACT, even though it is less time, they have more questions than the SAT. So pacing is something you really need to keep in mind when taking these exams. That's why it's so important to take practice exams so you have an idea of the pacing, because you really don't have a lot of time per question, and you don't want to end up in a situation where there's only a few minutes remaining and you have a bunch of questions left to answer. So just something to point out. Okay, next slide. I think, yep, what about the essay? Real quick, the essay is not required by many schools at all, only 3 at this time. So a lot of colleges will consider the essay if you have it, but what's going to be much more important to them are your personal statements, your personal essays that are accompanying the applications. Nobody's really sitting there waiting to read the essay on your SAT or ACT exams. So if you're taking the test and you take the essay, great. We recommend take it one time just so you have it in case you ever need it for any reason. But don't sweat it. Don't spend a whole lot of time stressing yourself out over the essay, or spending a ton of time studying and practicing writing your essay. It's just not really worth it for this test. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what is a good score on the test? That's fine, we'll just stick it right here. A good score for some, a good score varies from student to student. A good score for one student might be an 1100. A good score for another student might be a 1450. A good score really just depends on what score is going to get you into a school that you really want to attend. So a good score can mean a different number to different students. And this chart just kind of shows you, just to give you an idea of the average test scores of admitted students for some popular universities. So just so you have an idea of what the standard test scores or average test scores are. So what we like to tell students is that if you have a school in mind or schools in mind that you're looking to you're aiming for, take a look, and you can find this information on our website, on the school's website. You can see what the average test scores are, and then make your goal score right, you know, a smidge above that average score to give you a pretty good shot of earning admission based just on your test score. Of course, there's other factors as well. Okay. Okay. The other really important thing about getting great test scores, like, yes, it can help you get admitted to colleges. Of course, things are a little crazy right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. Rob's going to talk about that shortly. But in normal times, a good test score could lead to a lot of scholarship money. So this is just to give you an idea. You do not need to have a 1600 or a 36 on these exams to earn merit money. You could see that some very modest test scores or average test scores can earn you merit money depending on the university. So this could be, a very important factor depending on your family situation, or if you're relying on financial aid or scholarships. So we do recommend taking these tests seriously. Scores can improve. So if you take it one time and you're not happy with your score, there is an opportunity. You do have a chance to bring it up. Of course, now it's difficult to get some test dates, but Rob can talk about that shortly. So, okay, and actually here is where my good friend, editor-in-chief at Princeton Review, Rob Franick, can take over for me and talk about some of the recent changes that have been going on due to COVID-19. Rob, you're all good?
I'm all good. Yeah, Nicole, thank you for the introduction. I want to thank my dear colleagues and Susanna, as well as everybody that's here with us tonight. Thank you for coming. As we noted in our opening remarks, my name is Rob Franick. I'm editor-in-chief at the Princeton Review. Folks, I have you for about 15 minutes because we want to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A at the end. I will make sure that I will send my full contact information. Please, I hope that we can continue this discussion moving forward, because we have a lot of stuff to pack in over the next couple of minutes. But please don't hesitate to reach out to me should you need clarification on some of the things that certainly Nicole went over, or myself, and you can reach me through Susanna or certainly through Anne as well. Again, I have you to talk about COVID-19 and its repercussion on testing and college admission. This is a plum subject, so I'm so glad to be presenting on it. And honestly, folks, we just need to sort of huddle up in thinking about the last time that any of your kids could have taken the SAT, I'm going to say it out loud, was December of 2019. It's not much better for the ACT because of all the cancellations that have happened, but the March SAT, and of course some students, a couple of Northeastern students, particularly Long Island, actually got to take that first date, the March SAT. But for most students, it was postponed because it was the beginning part of COVID till the end of March. That was certainly canceled. And then, of course, the May and the June administration of that exam were canceled. Similar for the ACT in both April and May. I'll walk you through some of the specifics there as well. But what we have up on this slide, the next time that students can take the SAT, you guys know this as well as I, but it's good to say it out loud, is August 29th. But I am responsible for content, obviously, at Princeton Review, but I'm also responsible for social media. The crushing posts that we are getting from Instagram and otherwise of students receiving their letters from the College Board, their emails, which all have to go out by the 17th of December, saying that although your registration is here, your test center has been canceled. This is particularly biting for students in New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and California, fairly populous states, and just to provide safe social distancing. It is an alchemy that not every testing center has figured out. As you can see in the second point here, both ACT and the College Board, who creates all things SAT, folks, they are trying to notify students no later than the 17th of August about that next iteration, the next time that you can take those exams. But each of those testing organizations, and my pitch to you in this slide is to make sure that you are contacting your student, your son or daughter's testing center directly to confirm whether that SAT or ACT administration is continuing to be on the books. As we move on, and Susanna, she's my Sherpa through PowerPoint. I'm so glad. Susanna, you can just put up that next slide as well. Thank you so much. Folks, let's just put out a couple of things here as well. As we talked about, the College Board creates everything for the SAT and, of course, SAT subject tests. You all know this likely as well, but they also create all things AP. Now, let's just make sure that we know this. We just have to genuflect a little bit to the AP exam. At the end of March, specifically March 27th, the College Board announced that the AP exams would be going from a 3+ hour exam to a 45-minute, really a 50-minute exam with the submission for that May and June test dates. I bring that up because during those dates, the College Board administered a little over 5.1 million AP exams. And just to put it out there, the SAT pales in comparison. In 2019, for the full academic year, just 2.1 million students took the SAT. 1.9 million students took the ACT. So you could imagine the turf war that goes on there as well. But again, some of the criticism that you may have, and certainly people across the globe have had towards the College Board of allowing the AP exam to go on and the SAT to go on with cancellations, as crushing as those are. Early in April of 2020, David Coleman, who is the College Board CEO, announced that the SAT exams would be going completely online should most high schools and of course colleges continue with online and at-home experiences. That lasted, that offer, that glorious offer that gave so many students and parents so much solace, was available until about, and Susanna, you can correct me where I'm wrong, first or second week in June, where the ACT pulled that offer to do online testings come the fall if schools were going to indeed be at home and online. The one reparation that the College Board gave was this, and you can see it on my slide, that second bullet, September 22nd. There has never been in the history of the SAT a September administration of that exam. So now literally a student can take the SAT in August, September, October, November, December. College Board has also made the slight offer that should the demand exist, that they will also give an iteration of the SAT in early January of 2021. I'm just going to call your attention also very quickly to that September 26th date and the next date, October 3rd. That is 1 week apart. Folks, if you take one thing away from my portion of tonight's presentation, know this: we cannot, it would be cruel and unjust to have our kids take the SAT 2 consecutive weekends. I'm a longtime SAT and ACT teacher. They will not improve from weekend to weekend. What we're recommending for all of our students, and I still actively teach as well, is that, you know, SAT, if you're taking it, take it September 26th if you can. And then, of course, you can take the SAT subject text on October 3rd. So that is where it sits right now. We were expecting much better things from the College Board and the SAT, one in line with that online testing promise as well. But again, that's not the case. Susanna, let's take a look at the ACT slide, and you could just throw up the whole thing as well. Excellent. ACT has fared slightly better. They had the cancellations that we talked about in the spring, but the June and July administrations of the ACT went on. However, they did not go on unfettered. A mere 40% of all of the students who signed up for the June and July dates for the ACT received a cancellation from the ACT team saying that although they had registered appropriately, that their testing center would not be honoring that ticket of admission. And again, as biting as that is, the ACT also made a couple of other changes and some things that were crushing for students, and I'm sure the parents that are listening to us tonight as well. The online tests that the ACT was promising for the fall were also suspended. If you're an SAT and ACT testing geek like me, you'll remember this. In September of 2019, the ACT announced that come the September 2020, students would be able to sit for single section retests, which meant that as long as your son or daughter took a full ACT, the 4 compulsory sections of the ACT, that they could then, come September 2020, take 1, 2, or 3 single section retests. From a testing perspective, from a teaching perspective, that is a coup for students, meaning that if you wanted to improve your science score, one of the 4 compulsory sections on the ACT, you could then just take the science portion of the exam. That is a tectonic shift. However, it was also rescinded, and likely for appropriate reasons. The ACT said, listen, we're not going to be able to put this, albeit glorious, opportunity for students in place if students weren't able to take the full compulsory, all 4 sections of that ACT. However, ACT, as much as they have failed many students this summer, and so many students were receiving so many cancellations from the testing center, they were doing it for good reason, and I don't fault them for this. The idea of providing a safe environment for our kids to be tested in. But again, there are things that the ACT is saying. Online testing is suspended for now. They have alluded to the fact that late in the fall or early in the winter, there well may be online testing available through the ACT. And you'll recall what I said, the turf war, 2.1 million students took the SAT last year, 1.9 million students took the ACT. Folks, let's just make the bet right now. If ACT says that they're able to do online testing come November, you know who's going to win the turf war? You can figure out the math. The scores are up there. And Susanna, let's move on to the next slide, my friend. Oh, this is the good one. Yeah. Okay. So this is just, folks, the paint is literally still being applied. You know this, I know this, all of our colleagues on this call know this as well. And what is going to happen for fall reopening plans for 2020, but more appropriate for our conversation tonight is what is going to happen to the class of 2021. How are they going to be challenged from a testing and admission perspective? Susanna, let's look at the next slide. Test, if you could throw it all up there, test optional schools. Wherever we receive our news from, we know that at the beginning part of this summer and continuously throughout the summer, we are seeing more and more schools jumping onto the test optional bandwagon. Those parents that might have younger kids that are just joining us tonight, let's just define. Test optional simply means that you needn't submit an SAT or ACT score for academic admission to a school. But as you can see here, there are schools that have announced 1 year temporary hiatus for the SAT and ACT as a compulsory requirement, some in the pilot program 2 or 3 years, and then a permanent policy. I had this on my next slide, but I'm going to say it out loud here as well. I recognize that I'm a test prep teacher, and I love teaching to these tests because they are poor tests. As Nicole was saying, they are deeply flawed, they are incredibly coachable, but they are also the gatekeepers for not only academic admission, but for scholarship dollars as well, right? So, I mean, this is just math, right? I mean, this is just the way things happen. But test optional schools, folks, does not mean test prohibited. I'm going to give you the example. I'm going to use Cornell. And Susanna has one of her children is graduating from Cornell this year. We are huge fans of Cornell. And of course, all of these wonderful schools on this list, but Cornell said this year, we are going test optional, but here's the caveat that they had said. We're going test optional. However, if you were in a community where SAT and ACT scores are available and your test dates are durable test dates, we still expect you to submit your SAT and ACT scores. So let's just try to reconcile that in our own noggins. And, you know, Cornell is not the minority here. Let's talk about these other, you know, there's other schools that are on this list. We should continue to ensure that we have this information at the ready. And I'm not putting this up there to disparage any of the testing organizations or schools themselves. I'm an old admission guy as well. I love test optional, but what I dislike is when schools allude to the fact that we're test optional, unless you want to apply for scholarship dollars. This is the big chatter around our admission space, you know, each year. This was the big talk at a big educational conference that we all attend back in September last year. How despicable is it that some schools will say we're test optional unless you want to apply for scholarship dollars or academic placement? So it sits there as well. The University of Southern California, certainly big fans of it, but the Cal State system, right? You were beat with this news at the beginning of the summer. The Cal State system, which other than the SUNY system, the state university system in New York, is the second largest state university system in the country, 500,000 students, 57,000 faculty members, they have now gone test optional. However, that does not mean test prohibited. And I'm just going to put, Susanna, let's just put up that next slide and make sure that I'm not blowing past my time here. You can just throw all those points up. I mentioned this test optional is not test prohibitive, and let's just paint the picture, right? You're a parent and your son or daughter goes in after the January break in 2020, and they're juniors going into their their spring semester, and they're like, you know what, Mom, I'm gonna be awesome this year academically. You know, I'm gonna do so well in all my classes. I'm gonna do well on the, you know, on athletics. I might, you know, star in the school play. I mean, and then factor in the beginning and latter part of March, where we know the tectonic shift, students move from face-to-face to online very, very rapidly. And then the more crushing part is that so many schools, and I'm ignorant if this happened in the Westfield School District, but I'll just put it out there. So many schools nationally move from letter generating courses to pass-fail courses. And that's crushing for students. Plus, you know, the majority of extracurricular activities, as most of them were in person, you guys know this as well as I do, were all canceled. So when we start to think about, are there ways that a student couldn't distinguish themselves in these times when so many things are being taken away from them academically and otherwise. I recognize that I'm a testing guy, but I cannot see this another way. I see that the SAT and the ACT, and I'm going to say it out loud, AP exams as well, slightly less extent for the SAT subject test, but those big three, the Trinity, SAT, ACT, and AP exams, give students the opportunity to distinguish themselves in a given year, but factor in a global pandemic when so many other things are taken away, and we have opportunity here. Now, that might, and we don't have to agree on this point, but this is my opinion. We had a little over 1.4 million students come through our channel at Princeton Review last year. That's 1 out of every 2 students who applied to college last year. So I am very clear about my guidance to those students. I want to make sure that you're maximizing your opportunities that you have in a world that so many of those opportunities are being taken off your plate, not in your control. But the SAT and standardized tests are in your control for the most part, unless you get canceled all the time. But you're getting my point. Susanna, I promise to get off my soapbox, but let's one more slide here. This is an important one to mention. Folks, there are some schools, as I had mentioned, that are test optional that will award merit-based grants. This is academic merit-based money based on your performance in high school, cross that stream with the SAT and ACT. But some of them, due to COVID, are saying, hey, we can't penalize a student. What I need you to take away from this slide is that colleges, in large part, colleges and universities across the planet are saying, listen, we can't penalize a student because their SAT and ACT was canceled and they weren't able to take it. And we certainly can't penalize them if they had intention for the fall of 2021 to have 3 iterations of the SAT under their academic belt, but now they only have 1. And that's just a reality. And that's an awesome reality for us to reconcile in our heads, right? For us to reconcile that schools are not there hoping to penalize students for that. And I speak to a lot, I have a lot of kids in my own class, but I try to make that clear to students. But there are some schools that are saying, listen, we also can't hold that against you from a monetary, from a scholarship perspective as well. But that's still not all schools. So our point here is, again, this is footwork that you have to do, as unfortunate as it is, but it will be that much valuable when you hear it directly from schools. What are their policies during COVID times on the SAT, specifically when it comes, as the top of the slide notes, merit-based awards? Susanna, let's look at this, my last slide, my friend, and then we'll move on to your slides. And certainly I'll be around for questions. Last things, folks, I am a glass half full kind of person. You could probably tell this already, but there's opportunity here, and that opportunity exists in a virtual way. We talk about this, you know the new nomenclature just as much as I do, demonstrated interest, right? The blessing and the curse of living in modern times is that every iteration, even pre-COVID, every iteration that we as parents, or certainly our kids, have with the school, you meet somebody at a college fair at Westfield High School, you chat with them on the phone, you have an email exchange with them, you go to a campus open house, you go for an informational interview. All of those things tracked, and that means demonstrated interest. Demonstrated interest, friends, can still happen in virtual times, and I'm going to tell you this right now, I believe it can happen in a more direct and a robust way. I feel this down to my bones. I've been working in higher ed for a long time. Fit is more, it means more right now than anything, but you have opportunity to build relationships. We're starting that tonight, and I'm hoping that certainly you'll part with my contact information, but more importantly than that, that we have an opportunity, us as families, certainly our kids, to reach out to schools. Let's say that this summer pre-COVID, you said, hey, I'm going to visit 2 or 3 schools with my son or daughter. That'd be awesome. But now you get to virtually visit 15 of them. Think about the relationships that you can have. They're virtual as they are, but let's say you might only been able to meet with one admission person, shaking their hands and having a slight connection with them on the day of your campus visit. But now you have a substantive exchange virtual with those folks in admission, with career services, with academic faculty members from the discipline of your choice, with current college students. Folks, that might have existed in a real open house, but it exists in every way in a virtual environment, starting with an open house or whatever the nomenclature is that a school uses and continuing. Thinking about just our opportunities as students entering for fall of 2021 and beyond, letters of recommendation. Let's use our time in the summertime. This is more important than ever. Essays. And this never makes me very popular with students, but I know it's parents tonight, so I'll say it out loud. Let's use this time. Write an essay, put it away, open it up the next couple of days, edit it again, show it to your friends, show it to your parents. We have this opportunity to do this now. I do a bunch of YouTube videos, then I'm going to shut up, but I do a bunch of YouTube videos. One of them I did, which was really a pretty popular one, on virtual volunteering. And then secondly was working during the summertime, doing virtual work during the summertime. I'll make sure when I send my contact information, I'll put it out there so you get the granular stuff. But what I love is that this summer, students that are, have great moxie and parents that are encouraging them, they can do, they have opportunities of substance, and they can have experiences of substance virtually this summer. And they can do that same thing from a job perspective. And I love when students are able to do those things. Now, again, it wouldn't be held against them if they didn't, but I think, for those students that are high achieving, I want that for them. I want it for every student, but certainly you're showing up tonight to have this conversation. I suspect that you're going to take at least part of this back to your kids, and that's one of them. I'd love for you to remember that. And I'll send you the video on it. Susanna, I think that's it for me. I'm in for 15 minutes, and certainly I could expound upon any of these things in the Q&A if that's fair.
Great. The big question now is, so do I test or not? Anne, I don't know if you were blocking my video. Doesn't really matter, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing something wrong here technologically. Here we go. So Rob has given us a tremendous overview of what's going on, how crazy and unpredictable the situation has become. And I think that people are still left wondering what to do next. Just to be clear, there's more than 1,400 colleges have decided to be test optional. Many of them, as Rob said, already were, but a lot of them are doing it either temporarily or piloting it as a permanent decision. So you can see that you've got a lot of options. There's 38 states that have had their flagships decide that they're going to be test optional this year. Big surprise, University of California, the State University of New York system, really some of the best schools in the country, University of Michigan, University of Virginia, have all gone test optional, which is really an amazing opportunity if you think about it for students who may not have previously been as comfortable sending in their scores. There's also many liberal arts colleges that are offering to take applications without scores who previously did not do so. If you want to look up a bunch of schools, you can go to fairtest.org and you'll be able to find a whole list of the test optional or test requiring policies of those schools. Juniors, what it comes down to is if you can possibly hold off until next year, that's what I recommend. Seniors are really scrambling to get test dates. There are kids in New Jersey who are traveling to Pennsylvania, to upstate New York, to Maryland. Let's give those seniors a break and try to keep some of those spaces open for them. If you already have a test date, then you might as well take it if you're comfortable doing so and if you feel that it's safe. But if you haven't registered for one, let's let the seniors have a chance first. The bad news is chances are the PSAT tests are not going to happen. We haven't had any definitive word on that, but with all the schools that are going remote around the country, I think it's somewhat unlikely that PSAT is actually going to take place. I don't know how the College Board's going to handle that, if they're going to try to schedule them for later in the year, but for now, I don't think we should be counting on PSAT tests in October. The most important thing for juniors to do right now is to focus on doing really well in their classes. Last spring, of course, was a hot mess, as we know. Some students may not have done as well as they would have liked because the online format didn't work for them or their teachers really struggled to teach effectively. It was just a very crazy stressful time. Really focus this fall on doing well in your classes in whatever modality is offered to you, whether it be hybrid, in person, or online. Seniors really need to focus first and most on their health, their emotional health, their physical health. That means if you're in a community where COVID seems to be on the rise and social distancing isn't really commonly practiced and you're nervous about this, really everything has to take a back seat to your health. Secondly, optional means optional. Rob talked about Cornell being a little bit mealy-mouthed about going test optional. I believe they were the first Ivy League school to do so. I did see a statement from Jonathan Burdick, the VP of Enrollment Management, which basically means he's in charge of admissions, from Cornell, kind of backpedal and apologize for having done a rather unclear and mixed signals kind of message. So I think that my hope is that they're basically saying, no, we really mean it. Test optional is test optional. Certainly many other schools are trying to be emphatic that they really will evaluate students without penalizing them in any way for going test optional. The one exception I would say is Purdue University. I think they're really kind of leaning on kids to test, which I really don't think they should be doing given the circumstances. I think that really has to be students' and families' decision based on how safe they feel. Based on the statistics that I've read in terms of the percent of kids who've actually taken a test already and the percent are expected to have taken one by the end of December, which is generally the last time that anybody can take it and still use in an application to colleges, my guess is about 30% of applicants will not have scores. They'll either not have one at all because they were never able to take the test due to cancellations or lack of seats available, or they will have a score that they took once and they really, really don't think it's going to strengthen their application and they're not willing to use it. So if you decide that test optional is your best option, you will not be alone. The fact remains that colleges need students and they're going to admit students without scores. So they would prefer a test score because they feel that it gives them something to hang their hats on, but they also are well accustomed to doing more holistic reviews. Most of them are, and they're currently doing a lot of training of their admissions staff to help them learn how to evaluate students without relying on scores. When you do have a score, one way to decide whether to apply or not, as Nicole was saying earlier, was to look at the schools where you're going to apply. You might have a reach school where your score is just way, way, way down below the middle 50% range or significantly below the average, the median score, in which case your score is not going to strengthen your application and it's better to leave it out. You might have another school, however, where it's a likely for you. The chances are quite good that you would get in and your score is really very impressive compared to the admitted students' scores that they report usually on their website. If that's the case, then you can report it. And the fun fact is that when you fill out your Common App, there's a main section just called Common App, and that's where you can enter your scores and write your essay and do all of the generic information that goes to all colleges. But the truth is that when you're submitting your applications, you're doing it college by college. So you can choose to delete your scores from one school, submit the application, and then add them back in to submit the application to the next school. So don't feel that whatever is on the Common App is set in stone and it has to go to everybody. You do not have to make an all or nothing decision. You can choose which schools will see your self-reported scores. And certainly when you go to the College Board website or the ACT website and you decide where to send scores and you pay per school, you can decide then as well who's going to receive an official score. If you choose to take the test, because you haven't taken it, I think number one thing is you're going to have to be really flexible. In the past, everyone would take some practice tests and they would try to determine whether the SAT or the ACT was the test they were most comfortable with and more likely to score well. Unfortunately, right now, beggars can't be choosers. And you can have a favorite test and you can register for it. You can register for it twice if you like, but you might consider also registering for a test of the other, a test date for the other test, because you just never know when something's going to be canceled. And I do have students who are actually prepping for both tests. The fact is there is some overlap between the two in terms of prep. If you're going to be really good at one, chances are you'll be quite good at the other, maybe not as well. The tests are different, as Nicole said, but be flexible and keep that option open. You're going to want to look at the early decision and early action plans for schools where you really, really want to get information sooner rather than later, a decision sooner rather than later. Certainly, if you have a first choice school that's a good financial fit that your family is likely to be able to afford, and you want to apply early decision, make sure that you know what the test dates are that they will accept. So for example, if you have a November 1st test deadline and the school says they will not accept scores from any test taken after, let's say, November 5th or 6th, whatever that November date is, then a December test might not help. However, in the times of COVID, colleges are realizing that they have to be flexible. So they may be willing to accept later test dates. And it's really on you to go into every single website and find out whether they have listed what the last possible test date they will accept for early decision or early action. And if it's not on the website, and often it's not, you're going to want to call the admissions office and ask them, because it might turn out that a school is willing to accept a December test date for an early decision or an early action application. It's good to know that in advance. Finally, as I said, no colleges require the SAT subject test anymore. 3 years ago, this was totally different. And Rob was saying, for example, if you have two test dates back to back, you know, the 1 week difference between September 26th and October 3rd, you could decide to take the SAT subject test one of those days and the SAT or the ACT the other week. That's probably a good strategy. That being said, the ACT and the SAT should be your primary focus. And if you can't do a subject test, don't worry about it. That should be secondary. I think very, very few students are taking that at this point. Most students who plan to take them were going to take them in May or June last year, and obviously all of those test dates were canceled. So I would say in general, don't sweat it. If you're in an area where you feel safe, where you feel that COVID cases are going down, where the school where you're going to be testing is going to be doing things safely, distanced, masked, everything like that, then that's your call. But don't take a chance just to get a subject test, because it's really not going to be expected by any schools at all, including the Ivies and MIT. These are schools that used to always require them, Caltech, these very, very difficult schools. Even Georgetown is saying, well, be nice to have it, but you don't really have to. So please put your health first and foremost at the top of your list, and really don't do anything that would threaten that just for a subject test. So more on that, focus on what matters. First quarter and first semester grades are going to matter more than ever. They always do matter, but now colleges really want to consider, to really see how you did this year, because they are not going to be relying so heavily on the grades from the fourth quarter or the second semester of last year. A lot of schools had pass-fail. You know, all kinds of things happened where they're just not going to worry as much about how students did then, because they know that it was a very stressful, difficult time for everyone. So more than testing, focus on your grades, because if you know, the testing is terrific, and if you have a great score, that's fantastic. But if you have a great score and you got a C- in math and you want to study engineering, all the scores in the world, all the 800s in the world aren't going to help you out if you didn't do well in class. Next, focus on your applications and essays. Make sure that you give those ample time, that you really present yourself in as polished a fashion as possible. The essays do matter. Being accurate in your applications, believe it or not, every single time I am reviewing students' applications, I find little errors. I might find a digit missing from dad's cell phone number. I might find that the kid accidentally clicked on business executive instead of scientist for, you know, what career they want to follow. So be really, really mindful of typos, of mistaken data input, you know, a digit missing from a test score, anything like that. Be very, very careful and make sure that your application reflects the best side of you and makes a good impression. And test, but only test if safe. If you have any questions, I know that Rob has generously offered his contact information as well. I didn't want to be presumptuous and say that everybody could immediately call the editor-in-chief of the Princeton Review. Gosh, I wish I'd had that kind of access when I was a junior and senior in high school, Rob. I'd be calling you to ask ask, when do I use an apostrophe and when don't I?
I love it. I love it.
So here's Nicole's information. I know it's a ton, and we're happy to put that in the chat, or it'll be in the recording, certainly in any follow-up email we send. And here's my contact information if you like. One thing I would like to encourage folks to do is I have a Facebook group called Westfield College Admissions. It is not meant to generate business for me. It is just a public service where I share information about college admissions, preparing for it. I invite other independent education consultants and other test prep folks to join the group and provide advice and information as well. So if you look for it, you can request to join it. Finally, I know that Ann said this too, but I really encourage everyone in the Westfield area to join the College Women's Club of Westfield. We fundraise to give scholarships to local Westfield girls to further their educations. The College Women's Club was founded before women had the vote. So it's been around over 100 years. It's an amazing organization. They do great things, and we really hope that these kinds of events will raise the profile of this wonderful charitable organization. Let's look at Q&A. I don't think we had too many questions. One person was asking if the August 29th test date is likely to be canceled, and the answer is it's already been canceled in some places. So it really depends on your particular testing site. In the past, Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, in the past, generally those decisions were made either regionally or by the College Board and the ACT, and now it's a site-by-site decision. Right. Is that correct?
It is absolutely correct. So you're right. In years past, it would have been done at the national level, but now it is at the testing center level to accommodate space, capacity, social distancing. Masks will be worn for students throughout those experiences should they hold. The 17th of August is the date that the College Board has required testing centers to notify students. But again, their quick caveat was, as you had pointed out, you should still, parents or students should still contact those centers as well, because there might be some fluctuation.
And the reason we say that is that there have been some situations where test sites have canceled at the last minute, or they canceled but didn't tell people. And there were folks who drove an hour, 2 hours away to a test site and arrived, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 7:30 in the morning, having eaten their Wheaties, and there's a piece of paper on the door, the locked door, saying, sorry, test is canceled. So it's really a good idea to double check beforehand. I'm sure that'll drive the poor administrators crazy, answering the phone calls and answering the emails, but you really want to make sure that, especially if you're traveling any kind of distance, you want to make sure that the test is really going to take place.
Agreed.
Let's see, a couple more questions popped up. Advice on submitting AP exam scores. Well, I got to tell you, it's pretty funny. I know a student who is a terrific writer and got straight A's on all his honors and AP English classes, won a departmental English award, and mysteriously scored a 1 on the AP test for language. So let's just say that there's not a lot of reliability on the scores. They are roughly supposed to be indicative of how well a student would have done in the full 3-hour exam. But I think we can all take it with a grain of salt. Certainly look at the colleges and see what they will accept for credit. At the end of the day, a 4 or a 5 should be submitted. Rob, would you agree with me? 4s and 5s always good, right?
Always good.
Okay.
And particularly this year. And I think that, as you had noted in your talking points, the schools will likely be more nimble and likely more accepting of other scores. So I would not hesitate with those scores. Right.
I definitely don't submit a 1. Don't submit a 2. You can actually ask your teacher, and God bless teachers because they don't get paid for this. You can ask your AP teacher if you've got a 1 or a 2 to review they can download your test and see whether that was a fair grade or not. And if they feel that it isn't a fair grade, they can actually appeal it to the College Board, and then has to go through a whole process where they will reevaluate it. My student who got the 1 is actually appealing it, but you know, it is what it is. He's a graduated senior, so he's not as worried about it because it won't affect admissions. But you can appeal a 1 or 2. You cannot appeal a 3. Normally, I would say report a 4 or 5. Report a 3 maybe if it'll be glaringly obvious that you didn't take the test or you didn't report the score.
Right.
Like if you took 7 APs over the course of 2 or 3 years and you only report 4 scores, they're
Right.
going to go, what happened to those other 3 tests? Did they not take them? It also depends on the school. Some schools don't require students to take the tests. Others, like Westfield High School, strongly encourage students to take the tests. That being said, I just never report a 1 or a 2. Just let them think you got sick that day or you broke your hand, you know, playing, I don't know, football, and you didn't take the test. The 3s are the ones that are tough. That's where the 3 isn't going to really help your application. It might be at super elite schools, it might be a slight negative, but on the other hand, you don't want to not report it and have them think you got a 1 or a 2.
Right.
That's my approach. Rob, do you take the same general approach?
Yeah, I agree, and I think you're right. I particularly agree with that. You're right at that most
At the very
competitive
high level.
When there's such granular detail given to those, whether it's an AP exam on the many tests that you're taking. As we were talking about before, the I think I said 5.1. It's really 5.2 million students that took the AP exam in 2019, roughly the same in 2020. But 50% of all those students take 2 or more. So it's just that it's difficult. But you're right, at that upper level, I think that's very fair advice.
Well, and we have just one more comment from somebody, Rob, who is reading your book.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, your book on college admissions 101. Do you want to talk about that for a minute, since we have someone who's an admirer?
Yeah, I have it. Well, that's very kind. Yeah, that book came out 2 years ago. Funny enough, we're updating it for COVID, and I have that copy due on Tuesday. So it's and it comes out on the 27th of October. But it is essentially the same template. So the idea is, I spent a lot of time on the road. Last year, I did 107 live events, across the country with students and parents. I do a lot of counselor talks and whatever. But it seems that so many of the same questions come up from students and parents. So the idea of that book that you have, the College Admission 101, were the 60 most reoccurring questions from students and parents, so we could definitively answer them. And then did a YouTube series that I answered most of the questions on video as well, because a lot of students don't like to read as much as parents might. But now we've done that same thing, but put a COVID slant on it. So many of the things that we discussed tonight, but thinking about test optional, what does it mean? That's one of the big ones. What do you do if you can't take the SAT or ACT? So the things that we've substantively covered tonight, I'm doing that new book. So I'll make sure you'll target my contact information. I won't bombard you, but certainly as that book comes out on the 27th of October, it will be a good update.
Terrific.
Yeah.
I think that might be all the questions that we have. Yep.
I have a question.
Oh yeah.
I told the college counselor at my daughter's private school here in New Jersey that we were going to have you guys on the phone today, and he asked me to ask you, Rob, to talk to the College Board and the ACT guys about why they're not partnering with hotels and convention centers and getting larger spaces and offering these.
You think
there's been talk about it.
Oh, these places aren't being used, so why can't they be used for something like this? They've got infrastructure, they've got ventilation, they've got parking.
I think one of the challenges, they need teachers there. They need proctors. They need people to administer these tests. And a lot of these teachers, they can't do things outside of the school, or they won't, or they don't feel safe. Yeah. So I think staffing is probably the biggest issue.
Yeah, wow. That's so, I wish I was better friends with David Coleman. We are really frenemies, because we know each other socially. Who runs the college? But anyway, but it's funny. But I often thought, like Rice University, colleges are getting so truly innovative about the way that they're, like Rice they have a whole series of these huge tent cities that are going to be outside. Now they're in Houston, so it's going to be nice weather for a while. Probably not the greatest thing for New Jersey in the winter, but many of them are going to be semi-permanent classroom space that they can accommodate 6 feet apart. And I just think for testing organizations, and again, I recognize that it's a difficult hand for everybody to play, but I do expect more from them. And so there it is. That's my criticism for tonight.
So another question that we just got, do you think that any of these organizations will move to an online only exam?
I do without question think that that is going to happen. And it's really going to be the race to see who does it. And there's a couple of reasons, if you'll just bear with me for 2 seconds. So we thought about, the SAT that made the promise in April, rescinded it in June that their test was going to be online and at home. They did it for 5.2 million tests for the AP, but they didn't do it for the SAT. Now, we'll let you make your own decisions and reconcile that in your head. Now, the truth is that the GMAT, the LSAT, and the GRE all went completely remote and at home. But since the majority of AP test takers and SAT and ACT test takers are minors, there were legal issues of them being recorded and photographed throughout their testing experience. That's the reason that the AP exams were at home and were take home, but they were only 2 questions apiece, in different iteration for each of those exams. But that was the reason that they weren't recorded like the graduate school entrance exams. However, ACT has very clearly alluded to the fact that they are going to solve this. As we had talked about, the single section retesting that was supposed to roll out in September, it was a compulsory online exam. So they already figured out the alchemy for that test. Now, it had to be in a testing center,
Right.
which has its own problems, as we see from a testing capacity issue. But the truth is, they are going to figure out that alchemy, and it is going to be a race to the finish. And I'm not hearing, they're just terrible communicators. Unfortunately, you're hearing all my unvarnished opinions of these guys. But College Board is not a great communicator, and ACT is worse. So, but the truth is that they do have good hands to play, and the ACT one, I think, is the one to watch right now for its first one out.
Rob, isn't one of the major issues fear of cheating? Because
Oh my gosh,
they try to proctor them through the videos to make sure that they're not cheating, which even then someone could have somebody on the other side of the computer, writing on a whiteboard what the answers are. But they're trying to use cameras, but in order to do that, they have to disable other things so that the kid can't look stuff up on the computer. And that just presents a huge host of technological problems. And as it is in the AP, there were a number of students, including in our town of Westfield, who really struggled to submit their tests because I had one colleague who's an independent education consultant say, oh, no, my son's taken 5 APs already this week. He's had no problem. I think it's just user error. And then 2 days later, she posted, oops, well, he wasn't able to submit his exam this morning. Something went wrong. And, clearly, since he had done it several times before, it wasn't really human error. So I think they still have a lot of bugs to work out. And I think Chromebooks in particular were problematic for AP tests. And I know a lot of schools, including the Westfield High School District, are issuing Chromebooks to their students because a lot of students don't have computers.
Sure.
So if they're issuing Chromebooks and the College Board hasn't figured out how to make sure that things go seamlessly on Chromebooks for testing, that's going to be a huge problem.
You're right. And there were, I want, College Board with their, reconciliation of how well the AP exams went, it said 99% of all students, were able to take it without error and flaw for submission. But you're right. The crushing emails, particularly that first week, it started on May 11th to May 15th. Those were the most crushing because there was no reparation for those, no other reparation for those students who 2 days later got an email and said, hey, your file was corrupted. The only thing you get to do is take it again in June. So, and that's...
and then the student who got a 1 after a stellar, English career, shall we say, academic career, he said basically something must have gone wrong. It was confirmed as having gone through and my teacher could see it, but there had to be something that happened technologically wrong where the College Board couldn't see it because there is no way that he's gotten 5s on every other test he's ever taken. How he could get a 1 on his best subject makes no sense. So there's a lot of bugs to be worked out.
Absolutely. And I think, as you brought up the cheating point as well, and that was when when College Board first announced at the end of March that the AP was going to be at home and online and not remote proctored. That was, there was, the most popular videos I've ever recorded were on AP and cheating. And it was just, there was so much conversation from students, from parents, from counsel. How are you going to corral that each iteration for each student? And I think that's a human thing, for us to assume that we can be good citizens, but also maybe that might not hold for everybody. But the truth is that there is a way to figure this out, and some organization is going to figure it out. And now, with California saying it's going to go test optional over a 5-year period, divest from the exam, but we're calling it the Houdini test at the Princeton Review, because they said at the end of 5 years, they're going to have a new test out there. And if I were for ACT, I'd be like, let me build your test.
Yeah, right. I don't know how that's supposed to solve the problem. I really don't understand what California is thinking.
I totally hear you. But
So,
wait and see. Who knows?
Rob, I think you and I could talk all day long about this stuff. But I recognize that we are coming up on 8 o'clock, and the witching hour is upon us. And thank you so much for having us on this, and I'll let you have the last word.
Okay, I just want to again thank all three of you for your hard work in putting the document together and for spending your time with us. Really appreciate it, and look forward to staying in touch. And we will share this document and this recording on our website, on the College Women's Club website. And we look forward to our next Zoom call, which will be in a few weeks, and we'll let all of you know content and speakers for that one. So thanks again to everybody, and good night. Thank you.
Pleasure.
So
Good night.
Thank
folks.
you. Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.